We are at the end of the 90s and the supercar market is not yet mature in a certain sense. It is not what we know today. Builders strive for the optimal balance between maximum power and minimal weight. The displacements range from 600 to 750 to 900 cc, especially for the Japanese four-cylinder motorcycles, following not only the pursuit of power, but also the continuously evolving regulations of the Superbike World Championship at that time. In 1998, Yamaha decided to focus everything on power but also on the extreme nature of the chassis, effectively creating a modern superbike as we know it today. The first R1, the one from 1998, is the one with the legendary red seat in the color scheme it was launched with, which many will remember. Whoever drove it perhaps also recalls a specific fear regarding its delivery, which is said to have been characterized by schizophrenia, but undoubtedly everyone in some manner desired it or even had affection for it. Since then, R1 has been synonymous with absolute sportiness for the Iwata brand, and after two generations, the R1 launched in 2002, generation 2002 and 2003, arrives on the market, which I am testing today in this revised and corrected version by Noisy Style, a motorcycle that, despite all these years on its shoulders, certainly still has a lot to say, but above all, with this blast from the past, with this test from the past, what I wanted to find out is how much has actually changed, not only in terms of performance, but also in approach in 20 years of superbike replica evolution. I am amazed by the enduring legacy of the R1 and its impact on the superbike industry. With this lovely autumn sun and the roads being quite bad, it's safer to be extra cautious, so let's go and give it some good gas. Before delving into the heart of the driving sensations with this 2003 R1, let's see what makes it special after the preparation, or rather the restoration and rejuvenation carried out by Noisy Style. First of all, the livery is what immediately catches the eye. The most attentive of you, those who may be particularly passionate about R1, may also have recognized a semi-quotation from one of the subsequent R1s, the first with irregular bursts and a 270-degree crankshaft that came out in a fairly similar matte black color, also paired with glossy black parts with a contrasting gold circle. In this context, beyond gold, lingering after the non-existent words, we delve into champagne, which can be described as a slightly more refined shade compared to the usual gold color. Moreover, to enhance the R1's modernity, there are numerous other aesthetic and visual details that contribute to its overall contemporary appeal and help bring it into a more modern dimension. Aesthetics primarily concern a complete range of Valtomoto branded accessories encompassing rings to facilitate fork adjustment, the oil cap, foot pegs, a license plate holder, and frame sliders, among other items of interest for motorcycle enthusiasts. In addition to this, there is, and it can be seen quite well here behind me, a beautiful spark cannon, not too slimmed down to respect the original lines and proportions of the bike, with this beautiful oversized tail that is no longer seen on modern super sport bikes, and that is actually a completely titanium slip-on that goes just downstream of the X-up valves, one of the trademarks of the R1. Let's mention another name. The delta box that identifies the double beam aluminum frame, which in this case, and I want to remind you, embraces an inline four-cylinder engine as we are used to knowing it on the R1, but which has 20 valves, 5 valves per cylinder, a common characteristic of the first 4 generations of the R1, and which will then gradually disappear in the following ones, partly due to Euro regulations, but also in the search for the best engine performance to achieve the powers we know today. Continuing then with the operations carried out by Noisy Style, but going a bit more technical, we have new Dunlop D212 GP Racer tires, both at the rear and at the front, obviously, so modern super sports tires that will certainly contribute to refreshing the motorcycle's handling. Not only that, but the suspension, both the mono and the fork, are the original components but have been revised by a specialized workshop in Milan, MP Moto, not only to bring them back to their former glory, but also to make them slightly firmer and sportier thanks to a revision of the internal hydraulics with slightly stiffer lamellas that create a bit more resistance to the passage of oil and make everything a bit more aggressive. Lastly, the final aesthetic detail. I haven't informed you regarding the pilot and passenger seats up there that have been reupholstered with a material that is similar to Alcantara, and then the pilot's seat has been modified with two perforated leather sections in the center and steel rings that are intended to be a reference to the automotive industry. Vintage car enthusiasts will particularly recall it on cars from the 1960s, 1970s that are arriving today. In a more modern version, it is often seen on Instagram because in real life it is not seen much on Singer Porsche, the €1 million Porsche Resto Mod that unfortunately I cannot afford. I hope it is different for you. After this automotive digression, however, we get into the heart of driving this 2003 R1, this missile from the past, we could say. And since I mentioned the saddle, I would start with the riding position, which is one of the things that immediately make you understand when you get on the saddle that you are not dealing with a contemporary sports bike. First of all, because that maxi tail translates into an incredible amount of space on board. Even the most comfortable super sport bikes available today cannot even come close to matching it. You have the freedom to move forward and backward on the saddle with an almost infinite excursion. Additionally, you have ample width and are reasonably comfortable, especially in terms of backside support. However, the overall riding position cannot be described as exactly comfortable. The footboards are rightly quite high and set back as expected from a super sports bike, but the semi-handlebars are rather advanced, low, sloping, closed as it used to be on super sports bikes. And in fact, to tell the truth, it is still fashionable on the R1, and it is one of the things that I, but not only me, continue to criticize today about the configuration of the R1's handlebars. Who knows why all those on the track have put the handlebars much more open. However, coming back to us on the road, this means that as long as you go slowly, the 2003 R1, this one with 20 valves, seems not to want to give in. On the contrary, it's a bit stiff. It tires you out. It puts a lot of weight on your wrists, forearms, and so you feel a bit uncomfortable, in difficulty, not exactly at ease. In order to start feeling comfortable and in tune with this bike, it is necessary to gradually increase your speed and get a bit more familiar with its handling and dynamics. And this is somewhat the opposite of what happens incredibly thanks to the technical evolution all around on today's superbikes, or rather on the best superbikes today, which are maneuverable and give you confidence immediately. Here instead you have to start brushing curves, accumulating kilometers and kilometers per hour to understand how the cycling works and how to make the bike turn. And speaking of making the bike turn, even when you have become familiar with the cone, here's another thing that betrays the age of the R1. It is not one of those bicycles that you can ride at a relatively high speed without having to think about it, without having to exert any effort, correct? She requests you to be guided with a proper driving technique, otherwise she appears somewhat hesitant. What do I mean? I mean that to make it work properly, to make it turn, to take it into a curve with sporty speeds. As a super sports car, you have to use your weight well, you have to push well on the inner footboard, maybe move towards the inside of the curve even with your torso, and also use the steering pushes correctly. At that point, yes, she comes to life and starts providing you with a glimpse of the driving experience, a glimpse that is clearly distinct from that of more contemporary motorcycles. This distinction also arises from the engine, which operates in a completely different manner than what one would anticipate from a modern sports car in terms of power delivery. This is not only due to the absence of the overwhelming performance support typically associated with super sports cars, but also due to the current lack of such support in today's super naked bikes. But also because in reality there is a nice chestnut already at medium speeds, dampened only by a fairly long gear ratio, which in the era of absence of traction control, driving aids, various wheelie prevention systems also serve to dampen a bit the excesses of the front of the motorcycles. And in fact, this R1 cannot be defined as a crazy wheelie machine, but actually with that mid-range torque, when you want it, it can also perform some nice one-wheelers in first or second gear. Due to my respect for the clutch of an elderly lady who is not even my own, I refrained from attempting to shift into third gear. Of this couple that accompanies you in road driving and manages to keep a good pace even without exaggerating with engine revs, with gas rotations. When, however, you search for all the power, the thrust also reaches high levels, but again compared to how we are used to today, after the change of pace that here marks the maximum power around 11,000 RPM, one would expect a further explosion at the top that does not arrive because here comes the limiter. On the other hand, we're talking about a 20-year-old girl who can do whatever she wants. In short, 20 years for a motorcycle, not like for us. However, there is a detail that I have not yet mentioned and that is spectacular in all of this, which makes the driving experience simply phenomenal from a sensory point of view, and the responsible is there behind, the spark exhaust combined with the 20V Yamaha, because the exhaust sound is not only high in terms of decibels, but it is visceral, it is angry, it scratches from the lows and then curls up with a pleasure that involves not only your senses, but also those of all the passers-by within at least 1 kilometer radius. Returning then to driving in this confessional of mine next to the R1 snout, one thing that I didn't like and that surprised me in this sense concerns, here they are below, the brakes. It surprised me because knowing that there is new and quality material in the braking system, I would have expected something more. Instead, probably there is a pump that has not been overhauled and discs that are significantly smaller than those we are used to today, 298mm compared to 320 or 330mm on today's sports cars. Here, the total of all this is that the bike, when activating the braking system with 2 fingers, did not completely satisfy me. In fact, it left me a slight feeling of bitterness, because occasionally you have to readjust slightly in terms of braking distances, you have to apply pressure to the lever quite a bit. You can sense that the system has been refurbished and revised recently due to the consistency of the lever, but it lacks some bite and power. The lack of a pleasant modularity, which due to the absence of ABS like no other control on this R1, is definitely good news. Well, I have expressed most of my main feelings while getting up from the wet grass, which was damp by the way, so now I am completely soaked, and this is a highly favorable outcome. I was expressing that I believe I have conveyed all of my primary emotions regarding this 2003 R1 motorcycle by Noisy Style that I admired. It allowed me to relive, or rather to experience, sensations that were completely new to me, because in 2003 I was just beginning to dream about owning the 50, which I would eventually purchase the following year. Consequently, I was quite distant from the world of supersport, superbike, and R1 motorcycles. This is precisely why I am delighted to have acquired this exquisite piece of the past, originating from the early 2000s, from an entirely distinct era in motorcycling history. During this era, supersport bikes dominated the market with sales figures that resembled actual avalanches of registrations, while enduros remained relatively obscure. Incredible how the world has changed. This time though, in the comments, I invite you not to ask me for other sensations about the R1 or for clarifications. But I would like if there is someone on the other side of the camera who still today or had in its golden days this 2003 R1 that could tell me their experience, their kilometers ridden, their feelings on the road and on the track for this old glory that still manages to entertain and excite. If you like this video, then of course I recommend as always to subscribe to the YouTube channel of Superbike Italy. But above all, if you like the idea of trying some older bikes, not exactly the latest trend, as I had already done with the 1199 Panigale S on the track, let me know below that maybe I will try to organize other tests of this type with sensations from another era. Now, however, we have really reached the end, so tinkers, see you again here on the Superbike Italia YouTube channel in the coming days, always and in any case with the throttle, and may it always be easier.